And let's bring you in, Diane, because you're having a look at the subject of decolonisation. And if people think that's a strange term, it is, but let's have a look at what is happening in the world around that particular term.
Thanks, Brian. I'm happy to be here, even though it is a bank holiday. So as a review, a few weeks ago, I covered the topic of decolonization and in universities. And essentially part of the agenda in universities, and it's spreading to other things, as we'll see here in just a minute, the idea that there are, in all situations, oppressors and oppressed groups. And according to the traditional definition of decolonization, anyone who is on the oppressed side of the equation is anyone who is not white. But we're seeing now that this is starting to spread into other areas, and potentially, I'm just going to throw it out there, really just as a question and discussion. So we'll bring this back to Gaza here in just a minute. But first, here's something that I saw over the weekend, which prompted me to want to talk about this. We are now paying, well, if you are in this particular council in the northeast of England, you are now funding a £475 a day expert to decolonize Hadrian's wall itself. I don't know how you decolonize an actual wall, but the idea here is, and just to verify that I knew my history correctly, the Romans actually came and colonized here, and they built this wall. So the idea of decolonizing the wall because somehow the British Empire is somehow guilty of something is basically the idea behind this particular person being hired. We also see in the Brent Museum and Archive, which is in London, they are hiring a decolonisation consultant for £5,000 for a short-term project. So we're seeing these kinds of efforts all over the UK and the US and Western societies in general. And this morning, I just happened to see something on Sky News, which I didn't include in my slides. I can provide a link to it, though, if you'd like to see it, around the Joe Biden's administration that is going into northern Nevada, into a Native American area to mine lithium from the mountains up in northern Nevada. Now, in my mind, that is true colonization. In the meantime, we're worried about words and what we call things in library catalogs and what we call walls and things. And the priorities are just a little bit strange to me. So taking this back to Gaza, here we have a video, and I've got a few videos from a few different perspectives because this is a complicated situation of the Palestine, pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, whatever you want to call it, basically against Gaza genocide, going around universities, which started in the United States and is now spreading to UK and Australia. So let's play this first one. This is from the 30th of April at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So there's a lot going on there. Just in that first clip, we see a group of students protecting the American flag on American soil. We see Palestine protesters throwing things at someone holding an Israeli flag. But there are several different perspectives to this. If we look at this next tweet here, this is a video which I won't show, but it's basically showing Jewish gangs attacking American students. And the video is saying that the Zionists were launching projectiles and beating people with sticks. And it's a video of an injured student. This is from UCLA. And next we have another video where we see a Jewish student who is supporting Palestine, if we have that video available as well.
Would you feel safe with a child, a Jewish child, attending a university like this right now?
Zionists who have entered the camp!
Keep it moving, you Zionists! Keep it moving, you Zionists!
It is raw hatred towards Jews.
A student's Star of David necklace was ripped off her neck as she walked to class.
One of my friends was physically held against the wall by hateful demonstrators because he was wearing an item that identified him as Jewish.
Unchecked anti-Semitism has become commonplace on Columbia's campus.
The university's inaction has left Jewish students abandoned.
there's actually quite a broad base of society which has some sympathy for the terrorists.
At some of these events, the chants have been F the Jews.
The protest was not labeled as an anti-Jewish protest.
I'm not asking what it was labeled.
And the Israeli government
The question wasn't what it was labeled. Colombia's leadership refuses to enforce their own policies and condemn Jewish hatred on campus, creating a breeding ground for anti-Semitism and a hotbed of support for terrorism from radicalized faculty and students.
So I'm afraid we might have had a bit of a mix-up there in the videos, but that was one from Elise Stefanik, who's a leader on the Republican side in the U.S. House of Representatives, who's been doing a lot in favor of the Jewish side of the sort of argument, I guess you could say. But where is this all coming from? I want to make a couple of suggestions. I don't know the right answers, but I think that some of it, from some perspectives, has to do with the push for decolonization in our universities. This organization called the National Students for Justice in Palestine, if you read into they've been around for quite a while. And if you read their mission and values, they talk a lot not only about the issue around the Hamas war, but they also talk about sustainability. They talk about gender freedom, Black liberation, Black with a capital B, all of these other things that some students are supporting when it comes to this side of the argument and these ideologies. I don't think that the war is this simple, but it's interesting to see how some of these groups put these things together. We see in the next slide, this was this group has been around since at least 2006, where they were talking about Israeli occupation, and they interviewed people from two sides, one from the Israel side and one from the Palestinian side. These were former reporters that were covering their thoughts on the occupation. But this is not just limited to the United States. It's also happening here in the UK. This is us talking about back to decolonization again. And actually yesterday was the first day that I learned that some Native communities call the US and Canada, what we call North America, Turtle Island. And I was a little bit confused. I had to go do my research to see what that meant. Because of the trend towards decolonization and saying, well, we live on stolen land in North America, they're now going back to calling things the original traditional names that Native communities called it. And so I didn't really know what that meant, but we see a lot here. This is an article from Al Jazeera talking about the comparison between Palestine and Turtle Island. We see a woman there who's from Panama holding a sign in Spanish, Todos somos Palestina Libre, which means Free Palestine in Spanish. So we see again here that there's a lot of solidarity growing between anyone who feels that they've been colonized and that settlers came in and took their land away. So again, these parallels are starting to come out a little bit more. This is a group in the UK that is similar to the Students for Palestine group in the States. It's called Youth Demand. If you look at the background, you see that it was actually started with this used to be Just Stop Oil students, and they are now taking action against the Gaza genocide, but they also talk about their support for resisting new oil and gas drilling. So again, we see sort of the convergence of some of these topics that maybe some of us wouldn't put together. And here's one of their actions when they spray painted the Ministry of Defense in a march through London. This was just a couple of weeks ago, earlier in April. And we go on from here to see this. What is the reason behind all of this? Well, there's a couple of things going on here. I think the University of Edinburgh talks about they started their encampment over the weekend. So we see here the link to the Edinburgh University Communist Society. And so this is linked to the Edinburgh Justice for Palestine. And what is the relationship between these two? Well, I'm not entirely sure, but they are definitely working together. If we watch this video, this is from this weekend at the University of Edinburgh here. so what is particularly striking to me in that video is that it's being led by a very young child who's leading the chants, probably maybe 5 years old. So they talked about in these links to the Communist Party branch at Edinburgh University. They talked about their links to the British Communist Party. And I went to that website just to see if there was any mention of decolonization. And I did find a couple of results in my search talking about decolonization in the former British Empire and how that was some progress, but that we have more progress to make as well. You can also find there's a whole subcommittee on decolonization in the United Nations. And so then we can look at, well, where does that take us to? If we go back to our old friend, Professor Susan Mitchie, our friend from the COVID days, the spy-bee psychologist, who is also a member, as we know, of the British Communist Party. And so there's an article from a few years ago on the UK column about a psychological attack on the UK. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is exactly what's happening now, but I just think it's an interesting question for us to think about. What does this mean for the West and this war that continues to kill far, far too many people? So I'm just going to ask the question based on this tweet that said, the problem with extreme left-wing governments seizing power is they cause the total breakdown of social cohesion, including this, quote, a global pandemic of hate infecting our universities must end. So just to ask the question, is one consequence of this war in the West a total breakdown of social cohesion? Brian?
Diane, thank you very much. Really interesting look at what's happening there. My goodness, so many questions, so little time today in the news, but we'll certainly come back to that. What I was very encouraged about is in our chat box, as you were talking, several people were saying it is all about division. And I think this is the key thing, that wherever we see one group of people being encouraged to be hateful towards another group of people, the chances are that we've got organisations in the background stirring the pot. And I think you've opened a very interesting debate here about who those people might be and what their objectives are. But the more chaos and confusion worldwide, the easier it is for the globalist hand to control people of whatever nationality, colour or religion. So I think we've got a lot more to do on that. But before we leave the subject, I'll just bring Mark Anderson in, because Mark, you discovered a particular protester who is a little bit more than he seems.
Indeed, Brian. We have a violent Columbia University protester who's, according to the New York Post, one of the few papers that digs behind the headlines. He's an heir to an advertising empire, lives in a mansion, model baby mama. I guess he lives with a hot chick or something, and a long rap sheet of all things. A trusted viewer, his view that he sent me in an email is there's nothing sincere about these so-called college protests against Israel and for the Palestinians. At the top, according to my friend, is organized Jewish interests, as he calls them, who have an anti-American bias and are feeding off the sympathies that some have for the Palestinians and feeding off the animosity that others have for certain Jewish interests, including the state of Israel, and they're aggregating these energies for their own agenda. So he believes that organized Jewish interests are infiltrating what's going on at Columbia and making it look worse for the pro-Palestinian people, to discredit them, to blackwash them. And so much could be said about this. This heir to the fortune that we're talking about, one of the most violent leaders of the Columbia University riots, he's being called, is allegedly a professional agitator and a limousine liberal. These are other words the New York Post is using. The scion of millionaire ad execs who owns a $3.4 million Brooklyn townhouse, and a stepmom dating John Cougar Mellencamp, a native of Indiana and well-known rock singer in America. And this guy's name is said to be James Carlson. So he's also called, Brian, a longtime anarchist, according to a high-ranking police source quoted by the New York Post. But it's just more proof positive that protests are not what they seem, and they're often loaded to discredit the very people that are putting them on. So back to you, Brian, and we'll continue.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for that. Well, I think that's telling us that we need to be very discerning when we see these things, because we know that in the Palestinian protests, there have often been many Jewish people expressing solidarity with the Palestinian viewpoint, and we can determine from that it will be in the best interests of powerful players to try and break that bond apart. But let's leave that